So for those of you on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean who haven't been paying attention, the President of the United States is currently under criminal investigation. Okay, not really. Alright, sort of. It's difficult to say, and no one really knows, but it's beginning to look a lot like Robert Mueller, who was appointed by the Department of Justice and approved by the Senate to investigate the allegations of Russian interference in the 2016 US presidential election, might have his sights set on the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Time magazine reported that Mr. Mueller is interested primarily in finding out the circumstances behind the firing of former FBI Director James Comey. A scenario which was hugely poor optics for a presidency that was already proving that it didn't really care about optics in the first place. The original explanation, which was given by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, was that Comey had screwed up the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. But then President Trump went on Fox News and mumbled something about it being about this Russia thing, the Russia thing being allegations that the Trump campaign, while Trump was the candidate rather than the president, colluded with the Russian government to swing the results of the election, claims the president denies. But why is Robert Mueller investigating the president at all? What's the deal with the Comey firing? And what exactly is Chuck Schumer? All these questions and more will be answered in this, the inexplicable second episode of Harry Explains US Politics Badly and in a way that inveigles meaning and defies understanding. I really wasn't expecting to be able to use that After Effects template again. Anyway, let's get into it. A number of events took place over the course of the campaign that led US officials within the intelligence community to conclude that Donald Trump, or at the very least officials affiliated with the Trump candidacy, had been working with the Russian government. In March of 2016, George Papadopoulos, who would later become a foreign policy advisor for the Trump campaign, met with a professor and a young woman in London, both of whom were affiliated with the Russian government, according to FBI sources, and both of whom promised Mr. Papadopoulos incriminating information relating to then Democratic candidate and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Papadopoulos would later lie to the FBI about his meetings with the professor and be arrested for perjuring himself, leading the Trump campaign to distance itself from him. In April of that year, future Attorney General, then Alabama Senator and guy who's competing with Mitch McConnell for Best Turtle and Human Skin Impression, Jeff Sessions, met with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. I wasn't able to find out what it was they talked about, but it must have been some spicy memes indeed, because when he underwent the confirmation process to become Attorney General, he decided not to tell anyone about it. That would put him in some hot water later once he was Attorney General, but we'll get back to that in a little bit. June 9th, 2016 is a date a lot of the Russian investigation officials are particularly interested in, and this event is probably one you've heard of because CNN et al. Won't shut up about it. Then Trump campaign manager and guy literally in FBI custody right at this moment, Paul Manafort, Donald Trump Jr. and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner met with Natalia Veselnitskaya, a Russian lawyer, who it should be noted denies being in cahoots with the Kremlin for what they claimed at the time was a meeting on Russian adoption. It later emerged that they agreed to the meeting because Veselnitskaya purported to have incriminating dirt on Hillary Clinton. This meeting was inexplicably organised by Rob Goldstone, a British music publicist with ties to an Eastern European singer-songwriter who in turn has ties to the Russian government, and at this point I give up because I don't even understand what's going on anymore myself. By the way, we find out about all of this incriminating shady behaviour because Trump Jr., the one everyone thought was the smart Trump offspring, literally just tweeted it out. He tweeted a bunch of emails connected to the meeting, including one that said this is part of Russia and its government's plan to assist the Trump candidacy, which somehow didn't immediately raise any alarm bells at all for some reason. Depression. Moving on, a little over a month later, Donald Trump, the man, the myth, the legend, nails the Republican nomination. Ted Cruz tells the convention to vote their conscience, and the convention boos him off, making it the first time a political party's openly booed the idea of having a conscience. Anyway, the convention is important too because the party platform was changed by the Trump campaign to make language about the Russian annexation of Crimea and its military adventures in the Ukraine less powerful. Jeff Sessions would also meet some Russians again, but that's already happened anyway. Next. In August, that Paul Manafort guy that gets arrested later resigned from the Trump campaign as pressure mounts due to his prior lobbying for the Ukrainian government. He'll later be investigated to find out whether he legally registered as a foreign agent before doing that, and spoiler alert, he totally didn't. Things kind of cooled down for a little bit after that. Trump says some things that insult people, but that's nothing new, and generally the election campaign takes over. Hillary Clinton starts sketching out her plans for the furniture in the Oval Office, and Bill Clinton does something weird as he always does. October 7th, two things happen at once. First, WikiLeaks, which has been given access to the Democratic National Committee's emails by a mysterious source, spoilers, the US government eventually decides that that source is the Russian government or hackers working for it, releases a bunch of emails connected to John Podesta, Clinton campaign chairman. It's some shady stuff. There was talk about Clinton holding a public and a private position so that the plebs didn't find out what she actually thought for fear of losing at the polls. There was reference to conservative Roman Catholics bastardizing the faith, that sort of thing. That would and should have been devastating for the Clinton candidacy, but for the fact that on that day, the Access Hollywood tape in which Donald Trump boasts about grabbing certain elements of the female anatomy came out and, in the mainstream media's estimation, torpedoed Trump's chances of entering the White House. A month later, Trump wins the White House. Legend. So that's the events of the campaign, or at least the ones that the investigators are interested in brief. But what happened once Trump took over? Well, for one, in the days after the election, former British spy Christopher Steele, who had been working in the pay of the Democratic Party during the campaign, but became a free agent when Trump won the presidency, released a controversial dossier containing allegations that Trump was vulnerable to blackmail by the Russian government as a result of events that took place years ago. BuzzFeed, ever the bastion of good journalism, ran with the story and published the dossier in full, despite the fact the national security infrastructure hadn't really quite cleared it for release yet. The media have a bit of a field day, and then that blows over and no one seems to care. Then Trump becomes president of the United States on a cold January morning in 2017. A man named General Michael Flynn takes office as his national security advisor and promptly leaves again not long after when the White House fire him for lying to then Vice President-elect Mike Pence for dun talking to the Russians. That seems to be a through line, and I'm not saying I think the Trump campaign necessarily worked with the Russians, but there are far too many Russians in this story for me to feel comfortable. Anyway, then the Senator from Alabama, Jeff Sessions, is nominated by President Trump to be Attorney General of the United States. The Senate confirms him, then finds out that because he didn't tell the whole truth at the confirmation hearing, he got approved without the Senate knowing he'd actually spoken to the Russians in, episode 14 of whatever this is. Spinning on a bit now, the FBI have already opened an investigation into the Russian interference in the election. The Obama administration formally accused the Russians of being in on it and levied hella sanctions as a result, with the FBI being ordered by Obama under then Director James Comey to look into it. They did so, and then Trump took over as president. At first, it seemed like they had a nice working relationship, Trump and Comey, but then according to memos Comey took of his meetings with the president, his refusal to drop the FBI's investigation of former NSA Michael Flynn, or to put it about that Trump wasn't under investigation by the Bureau even though he arguably was, led to Trump deciding to seek cause to remove him from office, which he soon did when Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein gave him an excuse. Then Trump went on Fox News and buried the excuse about 30 feet into the ground, a controversy which Special Counsel Robert Mueller, appointed after Jeff Sessions was forced to recuse himself from the Russia investigation on grounds of the fact he literally spoke to the Russians, is now interested in speaking to the president about, on grounds of the fact it's viewed by a number of legal analysts as obstructing justice, attempting to use the powers of the office of the president to inveigle the FBI's Russia investigation. Oh, also, in the middle of all of that, George Papadopoulos, Mike Flynn, Paul Manafort, and a bunch of other people got criminally charged. This is a really brief, scratch-the-surface look at the Trump-Russia investigation, and it's still not even clear if Donald Trump worked with the Russian government. I'm inclined to conclude that literally everyone around him did, but he was somehow entirely unaware. I hope and pray that the president was smart enough to be involved in the collusion, because I feel like it must have taken place, and I know if he wasn't involved, he really is as stupid as everyone makes him out to be, in which case, God help us all.